Dr. Alex Kamau Maina is a business consultant, and he joins us this morning. Daktari, good morning.
Good morning to you, Ndu.
How are you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm doing very well.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
All the economists and business people are now looking left, right, center, and they're saying, oh my goodness, now what does this mean? What does it mean for global trade? And we're looking at global trade, and then how does it affect us, and how are we going to then be able to analyze? And everybody essentially is getting their knickers in a twist, but we'll talk about that in just a minute and which direction essentially that we are going. CT, as you know, is in a different African country every week. He brings back proverbs from that country. He will tell us where he is this week and share the proverb, and then you will have the pleasure of interpreting that for us. Sawa sawa, Daktari.
Sawa.
Okay.
Right. We are in the Republic of Malawi. Wisdom is like mushrooms that come after you have finished eating. Too late.
Wisdom is like a mushroom that come after you have eaten.
Finished eating, yes.
Yes. I think that's a good proverb. My understanding is that more often we learn through experience. And by the time you are learning through experience, you have missed the right way of handling a situation. And that's why we say in the event that you try to do something and you don't succeed, the good thing is that you will have learned a lesson. And that lesson will be used by other people to make decision.
You put it very well. Yes.
Thank
very
you.
Well.
Fantastic. Good to hear. So, we're in 2025. President Donald J. Trump was inaugurated in January, actually on the 20th of January 2025. No sooner than had he put his palm down, he went and he sat in the Oval Office and he signed off on at least 5 new directives that afternoon. The next week, he did some other things that, everybody would turn around and say, what's going on? The biggest of them was the aid freeze, what we want to call the aid freeze, but essentially what they're saying is that they did a turnaround and they did a look around at their own economy, and they said, you know what, we're not going to be able to do this anymore. And when they were looking insular, the extra or the outward manifestation of that insular action was that it affected very many countries around the world. What that meant is that the aid upon which these countries had been depending on for a very long time then essentially ground to a halt. Now, just when you thought it was safe to get out of the water, he turned the other direction and he said, and this is actually happening in rapid succession. So people were still reeling from the effects of that aid freeze. And then he said, you know what? I like this word called tariff. And what we're going to do now is we're going to increase the percentage on our tariff charges, or we are going to introduce tariffs on certain things coming into the United States. And in that one statement, what did that do? It plunged the world into yet another knicker twisting problem. And they said, okay, well, we can answer in one way or another. China was the first to answer. And they said, you know what? You do me, I do you. And then they came a few days later and said, you know what? One of the only ways to be able to deal with this thing, shut it down completely. But that hasn't happened yet. Today's Monday. We expect the President of the United States to add another tariff to computer goods and chips and electronic chips that are coming into the United States. And what that is going to do essentially will throttle economies across the world. This is just the beginning of this conversation, and these are things that are happening as we can see. Daktari, from a business point of view, tell us, is it as bad as it sounds?
You have really unpackaged the whole story and the discussion of the day, and I would say it is as bad as it sounds, because US being the superpower, it is said that whenever they sneeze, the world catches a cough. And therefore what we are likely to do is that the kind of tariffs that are being imposed on goods getting access to the US market, the people that will be hurt the most, first and foremost, is the US citizens. And when US citizens are hurt, they will be hurt in this manner. For instance, if there is an item that was coming from China and it was costing 1,000 shilling, and it was arriving in the US market at a cost of 1,000 shilling. Now, with the imposition of 145 tariff, it means now it has been added 1,450. So the total that someone will be paying for that item that was initially costing 1,000, it will be 2,450. So
somebody in the US now.
Somebody in the US, because we are talking about a tax of 145%. And that goes across the many goods that find their way in the US. So what will happen in the US is that we are going to experience inflation. And inflation basically is the persistent increase of price of goods and services. And when inflation hits US, it will get imported or exported everywhere else. Now, every other government, they usually mishandle the concept of inflation. So you will see the US thinking that the country is experiencing inflation because of excess money supply in the economy. So they will think that the market or the economy is very liquid. So what do? They increase interest rates. They say that we want to mop excess liquidity from the market that is giving Kenyan the common mwananchi in the US the power to buy goods and services. So they now want to throw water on the overheating engine of the economy. So they raise interest rates. So when they raise interest rates, now the purchasing power of the US citizens gets eroded. And therefore, they will not be buying as much as they were buying before. And that what would lead us to is now recession, because now factories will now stop producing as much because there's no consumer demand.
Okay. If we're looking at what would happen in the United States, for example, hedge fund billionaire the other day, his name is Ray Dalio, and he said he was worried that the US would experience something worse than a recession as a result of Trump's trade policies. He said that I think that right now we are at a decision-making point and very close to recession, and I'm worried about something worse than a recession if it is not handled well. We have something that's much more profound. We are now breaking down a monetary order. We are going to change the monetary order because we cannot spend the amounts of money. So whereby we look at the whole US sneezes and the rest of the world catches the cold kind of thing, the what would happen within the US then also is just as big. Before we go to then how it affects the rest of the world and the world's economy, we are looking at a situation where the president of the United States felt that if you tinker with these trade policies a little bit, you raise or introduce tariffs, what would essentially happen is that you protect American-based factories, or what would be the reasoning behind that?
Yes, exactly. That's the point. And actually, apart from protecting domestic farms, Trump thinks that the kind of revenue he will collect from these tariffs, he will use that revenue to give tax cuts to the citizens of US. So, and that's where at least I say it's a good thing for the US, because at the end of the day, if it succeeds, then they are likely to pay less taxes, because the taxes that they were paying domestically, that revenue they will collect by taxing other citizens of the world. That if it succeed. And it's something good, because it is the reverse of what the president of Kenya is doing. The president of Kenya is pushing Kenyans to pay more taxes, but Trump is thinking the other way around. However, before it gets to that point, it will, and I also start from where I had said that the US would increase interest rates on the cost of borrowing money in the US. Whenever the US increases interest rates, even Kenyan government will have to follow suit. We'll also have to increase our interest rates, because basically if they increase and we don't increase, the foreign investors who are here in Kenya, they would relocate the investments from Kenya to the US, because now the US government securities would be paying a better return than Kenya. So Kenya, to avoid that investors' flight, they would also increase interest rates. And here domestically, as we speak, we have had Dr. Kamau Maina really been aggressive in persuading commercial banks to lower the interest rates that they are giving on loans on borrowers. And before even that sinks in, now we are being faced by a situation whereby the global interest rates are likely to go up as we follow the lead that has been created, that is likely to be created by the US.
But there's a different discussion, though, regarding those tariffs. There are those who say that as part of a wider strategy, it is often used as a negotiation tactic. Meaning, you force people to come to the table to discuss with you, and in so discussing, you have an opportunity to perhaps balance certain things in your favor. Dr. What do you think of that?
That is really true. And actually, that's the reason why Trump actually paused the implementation of these new tariffs. He extended them by 90 days. Yes. So as we speak, they are not in effect, only for China. The rest have been paused for 90 days. Why? There are three reasons that made that to happen. Number one is there was massive sellout of U.S. government bonds, U.S. government securities. If there was panic in the market, and everyone realized that U.S. could be headed into recession, and therefore I don't need to hold on their securities any longer, because if I do that, I will suffer a loss down the line. So what that triggered is the decrease in the price of the bonds of the U.S. And the decrease in price actually now increases what we call the bond yield. The bond yield and the price of the bond, they are inversely related. When the bond price goes down, the bond yield goes up. And when the bond yield goes up, it means that if the government of the US wants to borrow more, it means they will borrow at higher interest rates. And that's where actually one of the biggest
people borrow from their companies, their organizations, World Bank, IMF, largely controlled by the United States, largely.
Actually, the biggest lender to the U.S. government is Japan, followed by China. Followed by China. So, and of course, now you and I, we call them the countries. Then we have institutional investors and retail investors. Now the you and I. So basically, if the interest rate goes up, the U.S. government would spend more to borrow in future, and that was the first hindrance that Trump had to consider. Number two. Next year, we'll be having midterm elections in the U.S.
Yes.
And Trump got scared that the sentiments that he was receiving from the political arena was that he would lose the midterm elections, and he wouldn't want to do that. Remember, in 2018, he did lose the midterm elections. And number three is now what City has just said, negotiations, that there are countries that are willing to come around the table and negotiate with Trump. And for that, many countries, even in Africa, have actually, like now Zimbabwe, they have said we are not going to impose taxes on any goods coming from the US. And other countries are likely to follow suit.
But Daktari, as you talk about what other countries are doing as well, it is a point where people would say it's a reawakening moment for many countries, because you see, President William Ruto the other day said he will equally just respond to the tariffs that are being issued by the US. You look at Namibia has already said, so let's talk about the visa issues, and if you don't give us a free entry visa, we equally just stop doing that. You look at the way other countries are reacting to this and the effect in terms of other countries' U.S. relations and also just the economy back in the U.S. It will be difficult back in the U.S. So in terms of dealing with it, especially, let's talk about Africa and finding solutions inward. Is that a way to go for Africa to just say, this is our situation, let U.S. do what it does, and Africa trade among itself?
I like that angle, but many times our president has promised to really implement some strategies, and it has always been a disappointment. I remember when the prices of fuel were rising, and he had said that he would go to Saudi Arabia and have a meeting with the OPEC. That he argued that these are our trade partners, and I will have a meeting with them so that the prices can go down. Kenya has no financial muscle, or has no that economic muscle to really debate with the US in terms of saying that to retaliate. A smaller country like Kenya, the best chance is to negotiate, not to retaliate. The retaliation, we are leaving it to China. And Africa, unless now we empower what is called Africa Continent Free Trade Area.
Yes.
And we negotiate as a team, we negotiate as a group. If we continue to be fragmented, then we are not going to succeed. And that's why smaller countries, you see, Kenya, we are not badly affected. And I don't understand why President Ruto would be reacting. Because the 10% tariff on Kenya, that's the minimum that any country has been imposed by the US. A country like Lesotho, it has been imposed 50%. 50% tariff. South Africa, that 4%. Madagascar, 46%. So actually, us, we are okay. And the reason we are okay is because Kenya vis-a-vis US, we exported $737 million US dollars worth of goods and services to the US. We exported. And we also imported $740 million worth of goods and services to Kenya. So when you look at that trade balance,
it's almost the same.
It's almost the same. So for those people that the trade balance was the same, was balancing, then they were not imposed huge taxes. A country like Lesotho, they are exporting $237 million to the US, but they are importing only 2 million. So it is 2 million versus 237. And now that's what the Trump is saying. Now, this small country in Africa that is little known is actually sucking our blood.
Bullseye. So there you are. The problem here is that there is a need to have more money come into the United States, and that what would happen is that you would then be able to give huge tax reliefs to his people. It's one of the things he campaigned on. He essentially is wanting to do what he told Americans that he would do. Americans and those living in the United States that he would do. So you can see the pattern here, that if a country is importing much more much less than it is exporting, then I'm going to want you to not bring in so much to my country, and you're not taking so much from my country. I need more money within in the continental USA. So if you're giving me less, I'm going to impose tariffs or those tariffs on you, because then I'm going to make it more difficult for you. But if we can come to the table whereby you take much more, or you take equal to what you give and take around the same number, then we're not going to have a problem. As by your own admission, you've talked about Kenya, which is more or less 737 to 740, more or less the same number. But you made a promise to the American people that you were going to give tax reliefs and you're going to make America great again. One of the only ways to be able to do that is to have more money coming into the country. Now, if you don't have as much coming in as you do going out, you're not going to be able to do that. So we are all here scrambling for something that a man was going to do for his own country. And now the rest of the world is making noise. So my question is, do we get to the point whereby protectionist policies, trade barriers, tax relief, etc., is all things that he's doing for within America, and then being able to negotiate? So my question is, beyond what it does from a personal country's perspective, should there be anything for the rest of the world to be worried about in this manner?
Yeah, a lot to be worried about, because the world is being led by someone who is not very reasonable. And the reason
but he's doing it for his country.
No,
they voted for him because of this thing he said he was going to do.
The reason why I say he's not reasonable is because you can imagine in Kenya we have 47 counties, and Nairobi is the headquarters, the most developed county, and the one that generates a lot of revenue. Yes. So Sakaja compares himself and a county like Turkana. Turkana is the poorest county in Kenya. And Sakaja says, we are buying goats and sheep and mangoes from Turkana worth 10 million. For instance, I've just put a very reasonable figure, 10 million. But the Turkana people, they're not buying any goods from Nairobi. Probably they are buying only for 1 million. And now he wants to punish Turkana, saying that we will not continue to buy meat, and those they are pastoralists. We will not continue to buy meat from Turkana because they are not buying as much from the Nairobi county. Does it even make sense? Because that's what Trump is trying to argue.
But in the same breath, an American who's sitting in America does not really care what the person in, say, Lesotho is doing, provided them they have money in their pocket. Perhaps the wider conversation would be now how to have a trade that is balanced. Because while Lesotho, like you're saying, is exporting less, but is exporting more but importing less, it's because of the financial muscle. So how then do we create trade that would make sense for both parties is the question.
I like that. Number one, and why actually, as we speak, the trade deficit in the U.S. is $737 billion. And it has always been like that since the end of Second World War. The reason for that is because, number one, the strength of the dollar. When your home or local currency is strong, it makes imports cheaper and exports expensive. So it is very easy for Americans to import because of the strength of their currency. So if Trump wants to reverse that, then he needs to consider of devaluing the dollar, so that he can make the imports to the U.S. more expensive. But instead of doing that, what is he making? What is he doing? He's now introducing tariffs. Okay, that's number one. Number two is about the global supply chains arrangement. Global supply chain arrangement. Most of the American companies, they do production somewhere else, probably in China or in Africa. Because of the labor cost in the US is very expensive. It's very expensive. So basically, they need also maybe to consider about the minimum wage rate that they have in the US, so that they can now reduce the labor cost and make now the companies that had previously gone to seek for cheaper labor somewhere else to come and produce domestically.
But then you have to ask questions in terms of, internal policies, in terms of how that's going to happen. The reason why they exported this human resource essentially is, like you said, number one, it was much cheaper to have, these factories, which many Americans themselves started to call sweatshops. It was cheaper to have them in China. Some of the biggest companies in the US have their production factories halfway across the world for reason that labor is cheaper, source materials are also cheaper, and just the cost of doing things generally is cheaper for them to come and be sold at whatever price in the US. Do you think that they would be ready to do that at this day and age? Would Americans then be willing to take those jobs which pay less than what minimum wage is in the United States today? Do you think they would be able to, regardless of how you restructured policy?
They may not be, but now that again explains why it is not possible for Trump to achieve his goal, because unless because the other factor is the US, it is a high consumer market. Because they are the superpower, they are the richest in the world, they have the ability to purchase, and therefore, as you are saying, now trying to negotiate with them to lower the labor cost is not a good idea. But even what Trump is doing, it is still the same. It is achieving the same result. What do I mean by that? You can either tell the people, you can either reduce the wage rate and reduce the price of goods and services in the country. Okay. Or you increase the wage rate, and at the same time, you also increase the cost of goods and services. That's what he's doing. So at the end of the day, the people are left at the same level, because now the wage rate is very high, but also because of the tariff, you have increased the prices of goods and services.
Dr. Alex Kamau Maina is a business consultant and is with us this morning in the Situation Room, understanding Trump's new tariffs and what it would impact on the Kenyan economy. CT?
You know, for every problem, there is a genesis. And for every problem, there are always those who say there's a solution. What we're discussing here, yes, the point of discussion begins with the tariffs that we refer to as the Trump tariffs. But the discussion is actually global trade and the influence of the dollar and what it is that these tariffs will play. The moment such actions are taken, the most likely reaction will be retaliation for those who feel they've been adversely affected. But if we take the argument back to the genesis, how this began and how it is that huge US companies determined that they are going to do a lot of their manufacturing business in the Far East and China. It did not begin in 1 decade, 2 decades. It's began a while back. Okay, there was reason for it. But the thing that people enjoyed for the longest time was cheap quality goods because of that. Now, with that one decision, suddenly everything that was taken for granted and was considered to be easily, well, or cheaply priced changes. How exactly does that impact on the spending power of the American people, and how does that affect their own economy?
That's true. That's true. A good question. On the issue of tariff, and it's the same thing that we are discussing about inflation. Now that inflation is likely to come back to the US because of the issue of tariff. Now that is likely again to lead to recession at the end of the day. And the advantage or the milestones that African has achieved in terms of the AGOA. You know, since the year 2000, we have been enjoying the fruits of AGOA. AGOA means African Growth Opportunity Act.
Have we enjoyed the fruits of AGOA?
Yes, we have.
I would say yes, we have.
Yeah.
I would say we have because most of the exports from most of the goods that are processed at the EPZ, they are exported to the US.
Garments, yes.
Yes, and because we have been exporting goods and services to the US free. The US has not been imposing any tariff on African countries.
Yeah.
And now that it has reversed that agreement, and that agreement was first enacted in 2000. It went for 15 years. It was renewed for another 10 years.
Yes.
It is due to, it expires in September this year. And of course, chances of AGOA agreement being renewed for another couple of years, the chances are almost zero. But now what is good for Kenya is Kenya has only been subjected to a 10% tariff. And all the other countries that were enjoying the same benefits as Kenya under AGOA, they have been hit with a higher tariff rate. Let's talk about Lesotho. Let's talk about Madagascar. And our strength in terms of exporting to the US is the textile industry, textile products. And these textile products, our competitors in terms of exporting to the US is Vietnam. Vietnam has been hit with 47% tariff rate, Indonesia, and then we have Bangladesh. So it means that because our products have been subjected to a lower tariff rate, we are likely to be even more competitive than we were before.
But Doc, as you talk about the 10% that has been levied on Kenyan products, what effect does that have locally? Because then again, you see businesses have started complaining that cost of doing business has gone up, and as well jobs will be lost because of the same. So as much as you say it's just 10%, but what does this 10% mean to the Kenyan economy and the people who are working in those factories?
10% means something good, very good. It means very good, because we are talking us is 10%, our competitors is more than 10%.
China is 125%.
145%.
I mean, it's
Indonesia,
10%, but it's 10% that was never there.
Yes. Yes, but to understand this thing, let's go beyond our boundaries and look at people who are benefiting from a similar arrangement.
Okay.
The moment they are paying more taxes than us, we have an advantage. In fact, a huge advantage. So it means the likelihood of us being able to export more and by so doing earn more has just opened up, just as a result of that. So the disadvantage to others is actually a direct benefit to us.
Because we look at it like this, that a piece of maybe a T-shirt, both Lesotho and Kenya, we are producing it at a cost of, we use the same currency, 100 shilling. Now, us, when this T-shirt gets to the US, instead of being sold at 100, it is being sold at 110 because of 10%. The one for Lesotho, we are talking about 50%, so it will be sold at 150. So in that respect, the sales from Lesotho will go down, and the sales from Kenya will increase.
Okay.
And that compares with the same from Bangladesh, Vietnam, and a country like most of the
Myanmar.
East African, East Asian countries.
Yes.
But we're still insisting that when you have a number as low as 10%, that comes to the realization that, okay, well, truth, and it sounds hurtful, but it doesn't really matter, give or take. If Kenya decided that today they were going to stop exports of goods to the United States, the US would not feel the blow as much as they would, and that's why you have a 145% tariff levied on China. That's why you have a 125% levied on countries like Mexico, because of the fact that you realize, and this was a thing, we seem to imagine that a country that had an entire economic system based on making money, the capitalist society, and they even named it Reaganomics, we seem to imagine that a nation like that would then deviate from that kind of global trade. It hasn't. It has come and it's doing the same thing that it would have done before, only that now President Trump has ramped it up a bit, where he says, you know what, it is time for US companies to start making money. It is time to reevaluate our protectionist policies. It's time to start putting more money into the hands of Americans. It didn't come because they're interested in what is going to happen in China or Lesotho. It didn't. They're very interested in what's happening within their boundaries. Now, how it affects them is probably something that has not been taken into consideration.
But
I'm asking, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
So I'm asking the question, whereas the rest of the world is so hinged on this thing that what happens if America sneezes? Are we saying that there are no other nations, there is no other kind of collaboration that can be done where other nations wouldn't need to catch a cold if America sneezed? Must it be that because America has that, the whole world is shaking and is in a panic? Why?
And it's a good question, because the dominance of the US is slowly being challenged. First by the coming up of the BRICS. We have the Brazil, the Russia, India, and China, and South Africa being there, and actually Nigeria now are joining. Even Kenya, we have applied to be enjoined, and basically what that means, those 5 countries, they represent 40% of the world population, and in terms of GDP of the globe, they represent 30%. So if now this block continues to strengthen and operate, because right now it is so theoretical, they have not really started to implement the policies that they have crafted. But the kind of the uncertainties that the US continue to give to the world, it is actually strengthening these other alternatives that want to challenge the dominance of the US. Remember the story about the weaponization of the dollar. When Russia invaded Ukraine, US took advantage of their superpower to punish Russia, and all the dollar reserves that they were in the US or in the US control accounts for Russia, they were frozen. And it is at that point that the debate and the discussion about the BRICS even picked more momentum. And now the same thing has started because the issue of the US, and we have recently been hearing about boycott the US products. And that has picked momentum in Canada, in Mexico, and that's where we have seen even Tesla stores being lynched and being torched. And therefore, there's this kind of people saying that we are not going to allow US to continue bullying us. And that's where actually, that's what, before the US became the superpower, it is the UK that was the superpower. And the UK had that kind of an arrangement where they had become like the bully of the world.
Allowed to become the bully of the world, is it not? Because
they were clever.
Yeah, very.
Something called a Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Where the countries that they had colonized now became members of the Commonwealth. They were clever about this.
They make you feel like you're part of a club.
Yes.
They do. And they even have games to support it.
Yeah.
And they even have a fund that supports some of the program development.
And they give you a
programs
fancy pictures and stuff.
But you see, these discussions about China and Vietnam, what seems to be forgotten, American companies set up in those places.
Yes, they did.
They were not Vietnamese companies. No.
And hired locals to essentially carry out cheap labor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when they talk about industry, those were American industries.
Yes.
Okay. And the profits were repatriated back to
back home.
the US.
Yes.
So again, that discussion is lost completely. What is now preeminent is how these countries have benefited. And that is not the entire story, is it?
That's true. China has been very aggressive in expanding their manufacturing sector.
Yes.
And that's why they have been creating incentives, even including allowing foreign companies to come and set factory there without being required to pay income tax. So it's something that they have done for the longest, and that's what has made them to be where they are today.
But also when you think about Chinese manufacturing and goods and things that they export to the United States, for example, when you think of Chinese goods, it's not this panko thing that you see that you use it for one day and it falls apart. No, it's stuff.
Those are manufactured for us.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? So it's not as though they're sending the same things to the United States. Just like somebody has commented here. They're the ones who will actually bear the brunt of this thing, because that means whatever they purchase is actually going to be more expensive if it is actually agreed that these companies are actually going to send their goods to the US anymore. So when you say that the US is bullying who? They're continuing to do what it is that they've always done, and that's be insular and capitalist in their way of doing things. But my question remains, when we talk about accepting or receiving this bullying, because now when we shift the conversation towards what does it mean for other economies? What does it mean for the Kenyan economy? What are you going to do? Which is one thing that I've always been saying. These people who are looking insular, why can't we also be insular? Kind of like what Dennis has said. We're talking about this 1.3 billion strong market that's in Africa. Why are we not exporting and doing trade amongst ourselves first of all? Why? Why?
And we've acquired the skills.
Yes.
Dennis, you're going to say something. Let me just pause what I was
Yes. We've acquired the skill, as City says.
Yes.
But then again, let's look inward in terms of as a continent, as Africa, 1.3 billion people coming together and agreeing, first of all, on a monetary policy, a single monetary policy that will mean this is the African currency.
Yes.
And if Africa thinks like that and has this monetary policy, what would that do to the other global economies?
It would mean a lot, because as we started by saying, in terms of the issue of retaliation, Kenya is not in a position to retaliate. But Europe, because Europe, we have European Union, all the 27 countries, they have joined hands. So they are able to also say, you do this, we do this to you. The same thing, Canada is a big country, Mexico and China. All these other countries, even Japan has chosen not to retaliate. But in terms of Africa, if we can empower the African continent free trade area and come up with a single currency, that would be a good thing. Because It is very unfortunate that even us, Uganda is the Kenya biggest trading partner.
Yes.
But when we are trading with Uganda, we trade using a dollar.
For God's sake.
Yes, when we are trading within ourselves, Tanzania, Kenya, the East African countries, we trade using the dollar.
And that's what I'm saying, isn't it? That
Yes.
don't we have more issues, bigger issues to deal with than worrying that America, where they are, America,
Yes.
who don't bother with you about some of the things that you're dealing with here. America has now said that they're going to increase 10% for Kenya, and everybody's jumping about shouting. When you have Uganda here that you can deal with issues, when it is more expensive to travel within Africa than it is to go from Africa to Dubai, or that it is more expensive for you to go from Nairobi to Abuja or Nairobi to Johannesburg than it is for you to go from the US to London. Or that it is more, you have to go, for example, if you want to go to, you have to leave Africa to go and come back to. These are some of the things that I'm talking about. It's more expensive to travel within the continent. It's more expensive for you to do trade. And we have things that we can be worrying about. But then Donald Trump says something, and because it's an American global power, then we all start shouting. And we have things that we can actually be focusing on here. So when we talk about the effect that it has on the Kenyan economy, for me, it shouldn't be the effect that it has on the Kenyan economy. It should be the realization that we have a lot of work to do and we are not focusing.
But take, for instance, what it is that a country like China, whom we keep speaking about, or those Asian ties have done. The Americans indeed go and set up the factories, but they learn. Before long, they're doing something similar on their own.
Absolutely.
And competing favorably. BMW, please come and manufacture.
Come and do it here for us.
Mercedes, you want to manufacture?
Come and do it here. But for example, now in those they are called sweatshops, and there was a problem because they started to hire children to work in these companies, and that's why they got the name of sweatshops essentially, because they were locking people up in factories where it was so hot for long periods of time. Do you think that Americans today are going to work for $5?
No.
So this thing that he's saying about make American, do you think that they're going to go and work do you think Americans will work for $5 today?
That's
which is what they're paying people in Vietnam, in Thailand, in China. That's what they're being paid.
We have had advantages with AGOA. Okay? We have learned industrial tailoring, and we have understood how to produce quality. Okay? Now, we have the knowledge. But have we exploited that knowledge so that even if AGOA shut down, because at some point it must, we are able to continue with that way of working, knowing where to source the materials, how to go about encouraging that trade within the continent? Have we? Because that's what we were supposed to do. Or are our brains so wired that what we do well is to succumb to slavery? Because essentially, when you put yourself in a position where you have this dependency that doesn't seem to go away, you're actually enslaved. You may not think so, but you've allowed yourself
to be, and you can't even then see when an opportunity is hitting you in the face.
No, you don't.
I think we should be looking at, with the knowledge that you've gotten with the garment industry that you're doing right now, perhaps we should ask now the leadership of the country in terms of, okay, fine, we had the Rivertex, we had the Kikomis, we are planting cotton. How do we take advantage of all these industries that we have so that we boost the garment industry that we have, and we open these trade to the wider African market or other international markets that we have good trade bilateral ties with? Instead of looking at US, we say we have this knowledge, we can take this product elsewhere.
Who needs this conversation of panic that we have? Because some people start the conversation, then we follow. The choir master lifts whatever that little stick that they lift when they're conducting, and then as we chime in and say, who lifts it and why do we listen? Because in all honesty, we didn't always have AGOA.
Yes.
And
it came in 2000.
Precisely. Before that, what were we doing?
Did you die?
Yes.
No, we did not actually. Have we understood how to take full advantages of opportunities? Forget just the exporting, but how we have now manpower that actually has specialized skill.
The skill is there, but we are not likely to profit from it because of the production cost here in Kenya. When you talk about energy, electricity, when you talk about the taxation that is within the Kenyan economy itself. So if now we are the US market is closed down, we don't have anywhere else to sell because we can't sell to the rest of Africa.
I tend to agree with you on almost everything you say.
Yes.
Allow me to differ with you a little bit on this one.
Yes. Yes.
What you say is true,
Yes.
but it is not the problem.
Yes.
Okay?
Uh-huh.
There is some benefit we have derived. We are not seeking how that benefit can be monetized outside AGOA. Okay? Because it can. Who decides the cost of electricity? It is us.
It is us.
If we give rebates for certain activities,
Yes.
what stops us from doing the same? The decisions, economic decisions that are needed to make this thing workable are within our own means. We don't have to import those means. We have them.
We don't have when we say us, that is not very correct because the future of this country is in the hands of the political elite.
Again, I disagree with you. The future of this country is not in the hands of the political elite. We have decided that it is in the hands of the political elite.
Exactly.
And we keep repeating it as though it is true. It is not true. The political elite are very finely tuned to what the citizenry think. Contrary to popular views. If the citizenry move in one direction, my friend, they also move in that direction. If we have sold our birthright and decided they must lord it over us, then they will lord it over us.
It is very unfortunate, City, that is the reality of this country. Because recently I watched President Ruto go for a tour in Mount Kenya, and he was launching projects and promising to launch more. But basically, the president doesn't have the power to do that. No. The president doesn't have the power to do that. The people who have the power to do that is the National Assembly through the process which is currently ongoing about the budget making process. So the MP of a constitution of a constituency will say these are my requests. I need road here. I need this and that, and all the 291 constituencies, their budgets are taken by the Minister of Finance. And now basically after the discussion, they will say this is the projects that we will fund. And the work of the president and the executive is to implement. Yes. So this story that the president is the one that is giving handouts or promising to do this project and the other, it should not be the case. And that's why, City, I'm saying that the future of this country, unless something changes, it is in the hands of the political elite. We know the law, we know the corporate governance, how the government is supposed to operate, but it doesn't operate like that. Especially when you know even the legislature, the two houses are in the bed with the executive.
You know, we are going to end this show today on this medley is very good. I disagree with you.
And I think on that, City, I disagree as well, because then again, it is us as the citizenry that have ceded that power to them.
That's true.
We need to take that power
That's true.
back, pretty much.
And that's why I'm saying unless we do that, unless we do that, we'll continue to really be controlled by the few political elite that we have.
Until and unless it happens, it's going to continue. And you're going to have to get to a pushed to the wall situation in order for that to actually start to break. I think we see the beginnings of it. I think it continues when people start to voice their frustrations about why can't we be doing better, willing those in positions of power to do better. And so for me, when we look at what these tariffs and all of this next new economic dance on the globe is going to yield, that there is an opportunity for somebody else to take the floor. And I think we have to take that opportunity.
That's true.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.